So, because it's being live streamed, yes, if you don't speak into the microphone, I'm supposed to use the microphone. Yeah, right. But if you need assistance or to make it happen faster, I'll just stand to the side. Right? We're 1 minute away, so 1 minute warning, please. I may disrupt you a little bit if Mr. Boogie comes in as you go around, but we start promptly in 1 minute. Yeah, so 1 minute. Start promptly. Yeah, I'll give you like 10 seconds.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone here in the room in the United Nations House in Port of Spain and open the second session of today's conference devoted to the issue of oceans, sustainable development of oceans. I'm very, very pleased to be joined around the table by His Worship Chinua Alleyne, who is the Mayor of Port of Spain. Thank you very much, Mayor, for being with us. I also welcome Ava Maxam, Director of Institute of Marine Affairs, Craig Buru, who is going to join us hopefully in a minute, Head of Renewable Energy Division, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. Also Mr. Kerry Sheppard, Director, Coastal Protection Unit from the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure. To my left is Stephanie Ledesma, who is the Principal Executive for Trinidad and Tobago at the CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. And to my right is Professor Judith Gobin, who is the now retired Professor of Marine Ecology and Coastal Ecosystems Management at the University of the West Indies, and will be also our moderator today. I welcome all of the distinguished panelists who will be introduced later in the course of this presentation and session. I welcome members of the United Nations country team. I welcome all of the participants in the audience, and also welcome to the colleagues and participants who are joining us live on Facebook. we are doing a little bit of innovation. We are learning to do things in a advanced way. And we are very happy that this session is actually the third one that is taking place in different locations in Port of Spain today, joined by also experts and speakers from Tobago who are creating the content as Trinidad and Tobago prepares to participate in the United Nations Global Oceans Conference that will start on the 9th of June in Nice, in France. That's why we're here. This is why it's hosted by the UN and the Embassy of France, jointly with Ambassador Sheppard. We have started thinking about how to support the national process of preparation for the conference. And we thought there's nothing better than bringing the community of experts around the table and giving them the space and platform to make their key points about sustainability, about all of the different aspects of ecosystems, but also the economic development of the blue economy that we discussed in the morning, but also the things that we are going to look in this session, focusing on the impact of climate. I want to begin by affirming very strong and really unwavering commitment, both of the United Nations and the French Republic, to really supporting Trinidad and Tobago on its own sustainable journey towards climate resilience, towards sustainable coastal development. The coast that you have and the 200 nautical miles around the coast is the space that we are talking about. This is a front line for climate change. This is where climate is impacting, or climate change is impacting the communities already. And this is also the space in which you have enormous opportunities and where innovations, a lot of new things, and a lot of knowledge that you already have can be better visible or more visible thanks to the global events and global dialogue that will be taking place in Nice this year. The upcoming UN Oceans Conference is not just another high-level event. I want to say that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the global community and experts working on oceans to move beyond pledges and into action on oceans. There is the slogan this year, Scaling Up Ocean Action Based on Science and Innovation, and we really look forward to that event, shifting the thinking and the conversation towards data-driven, AI-driven, new technologies-driven conversation, and also joint global solutions and regional solutions on the climate resilience and coastal adaptation. So this session brings together exceptional group of panelists who are representing the depth and the diversity of expertise within Trinidad and Tobago and across the Caribbean, both from the government, and we will hear here from Mayor, who will highlight how cities like Port of Spain are taking concrete steps to integrate resilience into urban planning. That's of great interest to all of us. Then we are going to hear from Kerry Sheppard of the Coastal Protection Unit on efforts to stabilize shorelines and to protect national infrastructure along the shorelines. Hopefully Craig Boodoo is going to speak on the just energy transition that's going to align with marine adaptation and unlock opportunities in offshore renewables, because the ocean provides incredible wealth of energy, and this is the main thing that we are discussing in Trinidad and Tobago. It's also very interesting to see how different the conversation will be here and the conversations in other countries, like Barbados, like Jamaica, for instance, which are looking at oceans as a source of economic revenue, but a different kind of economic revenue from tourism more than from the energy resources that you have. So also the diversity of resources is quite exciting and quite interesting. We are also going to look at the financial and scientific aspects, and we are going to also hear from CAF on the financing, large-scale adaptation, ecosystem benefits, and how researchers such as Drs. O'Brien and Villarroel-Lamb from the University of the West Indies, and also Nazeer Gopaul, who is right here to my right, from the Coastal Dynamics, are applying the cutting-edge modeling techniques and engineering to prepare for future climate risks. And then Ava Maxam of the IMA and Akina Granderson of CANARI are going to share the work on mangrove carbon valuation and community-driven nature-based solutions, which are reminding us that best solutions often grow from under the ground and definitely from the grassroots. We want to hear and want to learn and want to take those solutions to scale. We are also going to hear finally from Maryam Abdu from UNICEF, who is going to speak to the need to center youth in these efforts, because climate resilience is about their future. It's about our future, but it's also about the future of the young people, future of our children, future that we are going to leave in their hands soon enough, and how they are already getting involved and very active on these issues. So without further ado, I will say thank you very much for being here. I will now hand over to Professor Gobin to begin this very exciting afternoon and the conversation on the table.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. And first, congrats to the UN for putting on this session, this conference, as a prelude to the UN Ocean Conference. I'm sure you've heard very recently, Sir David Attenborough, who's turned 99, he has placed oceans, after all of the exciting research that he has done, he has said the ocean is the most important place. So I think it is very timely that we're talking, we're getting prepared, and we do have an exceptional lineup. It's going to be exciting, it's going to be interesting, you need to be paying attention, but of course we can always go back to the videotaped bits to remind yourself what we're saying. I think it's important that we are all on the same page as we move to the UN Ocean Conference. We want to make commitments when we get there. We want to be agreeing that we are saying similar things. And I think we'll hear from our colleagues today. We have a very good lineup, an exceptional community. I'm going to steal your words. But before we get into the meat of it, I'd like to invite His Worship, Mr. Alleyne, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Gobin, and I'd also like to echo the sentiments congratulating the Embassy of the French Republic as well as the United Nations for leading the way in this effort and for collaborating with all of us as stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago in our preparation for the upcoming United Nations Ocean Conference. When I address audiences of stakeholders, particularly in a multilateral setting, I often like to begin by setting the context for local government in Trinidad and Tobago. In Trinidad and Tobago, as you know, we have two levels of government. We have central government and we have local government. But in a large democracy, there may be responsibilities that oftentimes are devolved to the local level. But in our context as a small island developing state, many of those responsibilities remain at the central level. If you take, for example, the distribution of pipe-borne water or the distribution of electricity, you may think that that is something that is a capital city would be responsible for, but in a country that is the size of a small city, it would not make good sense for those kinds of public goods to be decentralized. So some of those responsibilities are very much at the central level. In our context at local government, as it pertains to the environment, we have some specific responsibility. Firstly, we are responsible for sanitation. So we're responsible for keeping our communities clean, removing garbage from all parts of the community, in particular, removing garbage from our drains and our watercourses. We are responsible for maintenance of all of the main watercourses and the underground drains. And from an urban planning perspective, we have significant enforcement responsibility. I specifically mentioned urban planning because, again, in our context, the responsibility for spatial planning in Trinidad and Tobago resides at the central level, at the Ministry of Planning, the Town and Country Planning Division. The National Planning Authority has not yet been fully operationalized, and when that happens and local government reform is implemented, some of the responsibility that is currently housed at the Town and Country Planning Division will be devolved to local government, but that has not happened as yet. But we do have a significant responsibility for enforcement. So we have a building inspectorate, and one of the things that we pay particular attention to as members of council would be unlawful constructions in our watercourses. And I'm referencing the watercourses specifically, the drains and the watercourses, because a major risk that we face in terms of climate risk in the city is flooding. Anybody that is familiar with Trinidad and Tobago will know that from time to time, if there's a particularly high tide or if there's a heavy rainfall, then in the downtown Port of Spain area in particular, we would experience flooding. Recognizing, of course, that a significant part of our downtown area is made up of reclaimed land. So that if you're not familiar, the lighthouse that is just at the entrance of the city was on a rock in the sea. So all of that land, the sea came all the way up to halfway into the Brandlara Promenade, so that a large part of the downtown area is reclaimed land. And for that reason, we have a specific interest as the City Council to focus on our sanitation efforts, to focus on our desilting efforts for our underground drains and our main watercourses. We are actually currently engaged in desilting operations in the East Dry River as well as the Maryam River, which are the two main watercourses that we have in the city. And we particularly focus on enforcement with our building inspectorate. So from our perspective, with respect to urban planning, one of our key areas of focus is in enforcement. Another area that we have particular focus on, and again, it's because of our own context as a small island developing state, and the city not being the repository of all technical capacity, is collaboration. It's one of the reasons why I was so excited to accept this invitation to participate in this meeting, this conference today. Thankfully, I came into office only in August of 2023, but thankfully my predecessor and the council that he led had the foresight to also have a keen focus on collaboration, so that in 2022, the council completed the development of a plan that was developed with the support of the UNDP as well as Habitat for Humanity, with a specific focus on climate resilience in the city of Port of Spain. And we now have the benefit of that plan that was developed through widespread stakeholder collaboration and engagement. We have the opportunity to work on the implementation of that plan and not really start from square one. And the third area that I'd like to highlight in terms of our role as the city of Port of Spain would be infrastructural investment and maintenance. I spoke to the maintenance a little bit earlier when I mentioned the desilting efforts that we do on an ongoing basis. Infrastructural investments in terms of our underground drains and ensuring that grey infrastructure that has been developed to move water off of any floodwaters off of the surface and channel them in a way that does not negatively impact people's lives and negatively impact the economy. But we also have, coming out of that UNDP plan mentioned earlier, a renewed interest in green infrastructure. So we have a significant area of mangroves just off of the western coast, particularly at the mouth of the Maryam River. So if for those of you that are familiar with the space, you're talking about Invaders Bay and that general area. From time to time, we have these groups that come to us and offer their support in terms of cleanup campaign efforts, and we say, okay, let's see how we can collaborate. They bring all of their youthful vibrancy and hands We supply some machinery and we work together to ensure that we can do whatever we can to maintain that mangrove area and to support the continued development of what really is a green barrier that can protect all of us on the coast, on the western coast in the Gulf of Paria. So those are the three key areas that we have a focus on as a city of Port of Spain. We focus on enforcement from an urban planning perspective, again, because the responsibility for spatial planning has not yet been devolved to the city. We focus on collaborating with as many stakeholders as possible that have an interest in the development of our city. And we have a focus on infrastructure and investment and maintenance, desilting of our main water courses, our underground drains, the maintenance of our green infrastructure, and investment in new green infrastructure.
Thank you sincerely, Mr. Alleyne, His Worship. We're really very pleased. I think it's also timely to hear from you that it's all systems go. We're already partly into the rainy season, and we're very pleased to hear of all the efforts that has been ongoing in terms of the desilting and watercourses clearing and so on. We're especially pleased as well that you have mentioned the green infrastructure, because a lot of what we will be talking here today about, there's that sort of link to the greening. That's really what it is. We have recognized it's not so much the solid structures, but it's the greening and that type of infrastructure. Thank you for also recognizing the need for collaboration. It really is key. And I thank you again. And I need to say pardonnez-moi and merci beaucoup to the French Embassy. I neglected to thank you as well. You're jointly hosting this conference, which I've already said we are very, very pleased about, and we have a huge lineup. So we're going to go straight into the session as we go to Stephanie Ledesma from the SCAF Development Bank. Steph, it's yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today with you on behalf of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. So for most of you that probably don't know the bank, I would like to start with a broad introduction on what is CAF. CAF is a multilateral bank whose shareholders are Latin American countries and Caribbean countries. So it's South-South cooperation. And up to now, from the Caribbean, we have as shareholders Trinidad and Tobago for 30 years now, sorry. So it's our oldest member in the region, also Barbados and Jamaica. And we are happy to see that we recently have joined Antigua and Barbuda and Bahamas. Dominica and Grenada are almost there. We hope that by this year they will join us too. So in terms of green financing, what CAF has done, or what CAF is thinking as development goals. So in 2022, the bank announced an ambitious target. 40% of our approvals have to have a green and a blue component. And we're happy to say that last year in 2024, we attained that goal. Actually, it was 41%. And we hoped to maintain it and even to increase it, right? That is in general green and blue component. But more specifically in the blue economy, we have a target of approving $1.25 billion up to 2026, right? So how are we gonna go to those goals, right? So planning, as has been mentioned by, especially by Mayor and also by Joanna Kazana, it's very important to introduce planning and a strategy. So first of all, CAF joined the international framework, but joining the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles. actually in the last Oceans Conference in Lisbon. So this was important because this is the first global financing framework for banks, issuers, and other multilateral lenders to actually be able to promote a sustainable economy. This is the international framework, and to make it more ours, CAF developed the catalog on blue commitments. So 10 principles, 9 out of those 10 are already under implementation. And we also have developed criteria for blue and green financing. So when we say this project has a blue or green component, what do we mean, right? It's important to have targets and clear measures. Otherwise, it's just a bit vague, right? We can say this is green, but actually it has to be backed by criteria that are international, but also are ours as a multilateral lending bank. And in the framework of the conference in Nice, CAF is also going to launch the framework or the strategy for blue economy. So this is going to be a big milestone because this document is going to guide the bank in the following years. And we have thought this document as a South-South cooperation, and we see that Latin America and the Caribbean are like a solution-driven region, so at a global arena. So that's how we want to extend it and put it into in this conference, so stay tuned for the details, and that will be launched there, right? Another point that is important is the strategic alliances, right? Resources are scarce. So we have to make sure that what we do is aligned with what everybody or all the stakeholders involved in this project or in this endeavor are doing. So we have done several key alliances with, for example, the 2030 Ocean Action Coalition, the declarations of the Americans for the Oceans, and so many more. But I want to highlight in this particular point that by these alliances, we have managed to become an accredited entity at the before the Green Climate Fund, before the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environmental Facility. These 3 funds are really key because these are the ones that actually allow to mobilize big projects, right? Big capital to promote blue and green financing. So this is the general context that I wanted to put at the beginning, and well, we can discuss a little bit more later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steph, for that introduction to what's really very, very important, the financing. We get together, we have a lot of very good information, we're applying the information, we're attempting to solve problems, but we always, key to the discussion is always, what about the financing, where the resource is coming from. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to quickly ask you a question, just I think one of the key objectives, if I got it correct, of the conference is raising awareness, and for our audience, for our group here, as well as our colleagues online. Have you got any specific examples of the progress in terms of financing that the bank has done in terms of blue economy, ocean resources, or climate change in Trinidad and Tobago and or the Caribbean? Some examples that we might be able to appreciate.
Sure, that would be the second point that I actually wanted to discuss with you. So I said that we wanted to mobilize 1.25 billion, right? So far we have approved $862 million in 14 credit operations and 16 technical assistance that have a component of blue economy. In the case of the technical assistance, the Caribbean region has benefited the most, of course, for obvious reasons. The region is very vulnerable to climate change and relies heavily in the ocean, right? So, but also within this framework, we have $90 million that are being managed by CAF, and they come from the Adaptation Fund and the Global Environmental Facility. Last year also have been approved 2 interesting projects that are not under implementation yet. We hope that this year we are going to be able to approve them. One of them is it's the SARC Marine Project. So this is the biggest regional investment from the GEF to tackle the sargassum problems in the Caribbean. So the countries that will benefit are Colombia, Trinidad and Tobago, Panama, DR, St. Lucia, Grenada, and Jamaica. The investment will be $10 million US. So that is an interesting project. We hope that we get the approval this year. And to go more like precisely to your question on the case of Trinidad and Tobago, what are we doing here? So in 2022, the Adaptation Fund approved the project. It has a long name. Okay, I'm going to read it. Multi-sectoral adaptation measures to flood relief in the Southern Push River Basin. Why Southern Push? As many of you know, it's one of the most vulnerable areas in Trinidad. It tends to flood even with moderate rains, and it's highly populated. So when it rains, definitely the costs and the disruption in lives and the economy is important. So CAF, as an accredited entity with the Adaptation Fund, financed technical assistance to design this project. That was in 2021, 2022. And this technical assistance was very interesting because, of course, it was based on the studies that have been done before, on the data that is available, but also because it was very inclusive. The main goal for CAF was to conduct a comprehensive consultation process. So we could hear from the stakeholders, from the community, from the fishermen, from the different ministries about the needs. So we managed to have a very comprehensive project that now it's under implementation. So I don't know if you want me to go more into the details, or
I think that
yes.
we can continue the conversation. But thank you so much for that. I'm sure that was of great interest to our colleagues around the table and also online. What I'd like us to go into now is to hear a little bit more about the research and some of the challenges and some best practices as well of the really important work that's being done in respect to coastal climate adaptation and so it's only appropriate that we hear from Mr. Kerry Sheppard, Director of the Coastal Protection Unit in the Ministry of Works and Transport.
Thank you. Good day. I would like to congratulate the UN and the French Embassy on the wonderful work that has been done towards a green ocean. I'm Kerry Sheppard, the Director of the Coastal Protection Unit of the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure. This unit is a fairly young unit. It was formed in 2014, and that is to fulfill the mandate of SDG, that is the Sustainable Development Goal 14. We had a program called the Comprehensive Critical Coastal Program, which we have a set of projects to be done in order to protect the coastline of Trinidad and Tobago. With that, we had to form another project called the Comprehensive National Coastal Monitoring Project, where we engage consultants to gather data throughout Trinidad, data from different ministries, different agencies, that was not generally shared, but was critical to our commanding our designs using best engineering practices, so that in information was gathered and put into a system we call the CIMS, which is the Coastal Information Management System. So that's a database that we are building to input the past data, which is very critical, and gather data for the future, so we can command all our designs and use best engineering practices to conduct our engineering. The consultant was also asked to do an assessment of our use of the data and capacity building. And we have the consultant is here. He will chat with you a bit after. We also have the CNCMP is very successful. We have the phase 2 that is upcoming, so we can get some extra machinery, equipment to deploy where the data is lacking. So we don't want to duplicate our efforts. We are dependent on the IMA, which supplied a lot of our data. And where the gaps are, we will deploy the equipment and get the proper data so we can influence our designs. We also are part of the ICZM committee, which is the cabinet-appointed Integrated Coastal Zone Management Committee. That is a powerful committee that is appointed by cabinet, with most of the coastal managers in Trinidad, so we could get our heads together and come up with a plan. The plan was actually approved, so right now we are going to try to drive the plan, which is get all the stakeholders involved, advise on different legislation that is required, what is needed to manage our coastline in an effective manner using best practices.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sheppard. So really glad that you talked about no duplication of efforts and an integrated approach. It's really key to our conversation today because, as you will hear, and we're going to segue nicely into Mr. Gopaul, Nazeer Gopaul's presentation, because it's a lot of very good work going on and very good practices, successes. We are learning from our failures, and it is only appropriate that we really integrate the information. So, Nazeer.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd also like to say thank you very much to the UN for inviting me to this very important event. I think this is very important because there's a greater need for collaboration, whether that is interagency collaboration from the government side of things, but also in our fellow researchers. I think that the benefit that really comes from working in these groups where you have all of these multidimensional aspects of environmental work is extremely important because I think we all know by now everything is connected. From ridge to reef, the atmosphere, the entire ocean, it's all connected. So I just wanted to make some points on some important things that I think that Mr. Sheppard has already alluded to. And one of those is the collaborations between the various organizations. I think that the Coastal Information Management System is extremely important. That information is being shared right now between the IMA, the DIQUD in Tobago, as well as the Coastal Protection Unit. And I know that they have a memorandum of understanding with the university as well. So it's a very good integrated group. And I think that all of these inputs that we have can definitely lead to some successful ventures as we go forward, having the right strategies to manage the shoreline. And it's not really just the shoreline alone, of course, everything is well connected. So when we look at all of these, I think it's important for us to have a very proactive approach, which is what we do when we do numerical modeling, which is my specialty, so I tend to talk a lot about that. The modeling is very important because, as we're all aware, when you see the forecasts for hurricanes and all of that coming through the Caribbean, we are very vulnerable as Sint. And I think that those models are extremely important for understanding the effects, how the climate is changing, and how all of those feed into what we're actually seeing on the ground. Important in that as well is the monitoring aspect of all of this, which is what the CNCMP is set up to do. During phase one, there was a very good assessment of the entire set of themes, anything from biology, physics, chemistry, social aspects, which are very crucial in terms of how the environment experiences the effects of coastal change. In addition to that, I think that the community engagements that were involved in that project was extremely important, and I think we cannot say enough about the value that the communities add, because it's that local environmental knowledge from having people who live on the coastline all of their lives that really provides excellent input, even in the aspects where we think it's more, high technology or innovative, such as the modeling approaches that we take. But in many cases, we are monitoring over very short periods, and we are only seeing something that is happening over a particular period of time. But the communities who are living every day near the coastlines, within the mangroves, utilizing the reefs around us, the seagrass beds, very important. All of those connections, I think, are crucial. I think there is a need to have downscale models done especially for the small islands within the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago especially. We have a lot of development. Most of our population lives along the shorelines, and they are really at very high risk of being affected by any extreme events that occur. So one of those things that all of this feeds into is having, I think Grenada is already proceeding with this. It's to have a digital twin created for the region, meaning Trinidad and Tobago. That is really important because there are numerous aspects that come into play that are all fed into a single unit where managers have the information that they need to make the decisions that they have to make to protect us along the shorelines and on land as well, because it's all connected. I think just one more thing I'd like to mention in that respect, and it is the community engagement. I think that there are very important things that can happen along the coastal areas. We're already pursuing one of those. We have a pilot study right now that we are doing in Las Cuevas Bay, where we've put up camera cradles so that the community is able to go with their cameras and take photographs. The photographs are uploaded online within a safe system where it's documented, and then that information on the back end is analyzed by the scientists to then look at a regular stream of information that will be coming in, more so than if you had to expend a lot of funds into looking at the monitoring in a more detailed manner. So I think that's my main point.
Thank you very much, Naz, for that really, pulling together both what Mr. Sheppard and yourself have been working on, and really recognizing that we are small islands, we are vulnerable. I just want to quickly ask you about this. Was it like a centralized unit you were talking? The example for Grenada, I didn't quite get what you called it.
No, I was referring to digital twinning. So what it is really, it is putting together all of the various types of models that you have, live data streams that are coming in, whether it's coming from satellites, equipment that is telemetering data back to a central system. And we have a lot of that going on right now in many of the Caribbean islands. I just think that it needs probably to be organized a little bit differently, where there is a central repository where that information comes in. And I think, for example, if we were to look at the coastline, the CPU is poised to be where that information is housed to be utilized.
Thank you very much for that. It's actually exactly where I was thinking that we would go. We have so much done, and really we need to centralize, have a repository that we can all go to and find the information, because there's a lot happening and sometimes we're not aware of it. So thank you so much for that. So we're going to continue, and I think it's a nice segue for Dr. Maxam to go next, so we're making the connections about what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. I'm Ava Maxam. I'm director at the Institute of Marine Affairs. And we would have been operational since 1978, so we're a bit further along than some of the units here. But certainly we do enjoy the collaboration, with CPU, with UE, with Coastal Dynamics, and many of the other agencies. So our mandate is for creating projects and programs that focus on the marine and coastal areas, as well as ensuring that research goes towards conservation, and conservation in turn informs the research. That there's also outreach and awareness, and making sure that we not only serve Trinidad and Tobago, but also that we serve the region. So to that end, most of us would have realized by now that the ministry under which the IMA falls, the Ministry of Planning, Economic Affairs and Development, has recently added that portfolio of economic affairs. And this has become a critical area of focus, because for us, especially when it comes to conservation, research and awareness, we cannot leave out that economic part of it. So much of our research needs to align in that way. It shouldn't be something that's put on a shelf. It must be something that contributes to development and planning in a meaningful way. So to that end, we have been placing what we call the blue economy as the mainstream of economic development for a lot of our research and planning. And we want to formally recognize the blue economy as an important economic driver to be included in the national budgeting and development. So we have quite a few projects that look at the development of blue economy strategies, both national and regional, and we also aim to make sure that these incorporate growth sectors, both old and new. So this could include mariculture, renewable energy, marine biotechnology, deep sea mining, and so on. And what's important too is that this creates an enabling environment. So it's very, very important that to encourage investment, especially in Trinidad and Tobago and the region, we do have the appropriate policies and legislation and incentives that attract investors to our shores. So this is all in aid of trying to transition to that blue economy. Now, this means trying to identify the financial tools, but not just identifying the tools and instruments that work for us, but work for our context as a twin island state, but with a large ocean economy. So looking at our resources that is locked up in much of our ocean areas, how many of us realize that our ocean areas encompass 15 times more area than our land area? So imagine all of that resource that is locked up and just waiting to be used, but in an efficient and in a sustainable way. So to that end, I just want to highlight two main projects. The first one is one that is being funded through the IDB, that's piloting a blue carbon credit system, and that is for Trinidad and Tobago, the first of its kind for island. And this is looking at creating a high quality blue carbon credit scheme. And this is also to improve how we map our resources, or carbon, especially the carbon that's locked up in our mangrove resources. We also want to look at how we report and verify a lot of that information, because to attract investors, we want to make sure that we are capturing the information in a meaningful, and that information is verifiable even at an international or global scale. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we have training programs and that we can develop capacity for furthering our blue economy initiatives. So this will involve mangrove mapping, trying to assess the amount of carbon locked up in our mangroves, or mangrove rehabilitation and management plans. And so far, we've identified 2 areas that would serve as the pilot. So it's Bonaccord and the Kilgwin Swamp as the 2 main areas for the pilot, but the hope is that it will expand into other areas. Stakeholder engagement is very, very important. So we would have heard of involving our communities, making sure that those sectors, not just our formal sectors, but also informal sectors, fishing, ensuring that our fisheries are involved and that community organizations are a big part of this. Now, our second project looks at mangrove soil carbon sequestration. Now, would you believe that most of our carbon assessments traditionally looked at the amount of carbon that's found above ground? But our research has found that there's a lot more, sometimes 2 to 3 times more, that could be found underground. So now we're unlocking through our research a lot more of our resources that we're now finding is available. So how do we take advantage of that? And how do we make sure, again, that our research is able to bring out information that allows us to advance even further with our blue technology advancement? So I just wanted to highlight those 2 for now. And thanks again to the, this is something that we found as very, very apt for a time like this, where we kind of stand at a crossroads, where we are in trying to develop our blue economy strategy. And it's conferences like this that ensure that we are on the right path and that we cater our financial instruments for our particular context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maxam. So we did promise that you were going to hear exciting things, new information, new projects. Really, thank you so much for those the results that you've given us snippets of the results, and we're very excited to hear that. And I'm going to save a couple of questions for afterwards, but I want us to continue to hear about more research that's going on, and what better than my 2 colleagues from the university. First, we'll hear Dr. Charmaine Delpeche.
Ex-colleagues. Thank you to the UN for inviting me here. I was once a member of the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of the West Indies, where we have a MSc in Coastal Engineering and Management program, of which as one of the lecturers, Dr. Lamb is the coordinator, so I wouldn't go into too much of that. As spending almost 35 years of my life on the coast, it really focused on coastal erosion, climate change. We can't separate the 2. They're interlinked. So once you start looking at coastal erosion, most people think it's only because of climate change, but it isn't. Generally, it's for several factors, several reasons. And that's what makes it so complex, but interesting. Up to now, I think most of the times, we look at coastal erosion, but we don't know why, what is causing it, because it's not any particular reason. In Trinidad and Tobago, we're fortunate that we have coastal erosion mainly in the southwestern portion of the island. If you go there, you wouldn't believe the rate of coastal erosion, which could be over 2 meters a year. But that's not consistent. What I mean, you don't get that all the time. So that's the most, I would say, dramatic area in Trinidad where coastal erosion taking place. And I want to compliment the Coastal Protection Unit, which has been doing tremendous work in protecting our coast. But one of the things I want to point out is that we are fortunate to have nice sandy beaches, maybe not the best in the Caribbean, but they are quite narrow, and they have formed over thousands of years. So the beaches we are seeing now, which basically could be only 30, 40 meters wide, when you start looking at North America, that's small. And the sediments we've seen there didn't come now, didn't form now. That was formed thousands of years ago. And some of the damage that we have done over the last 40 years, especially like from beach sand mining, it's still, you're still seeing the effects of it. So the thing about it is, what we're seeing now is the impacts from maybe 40, 50 years ago. So we have to be careful that when we start looking at even climate change, what will happen in the next 40, 50 years. The other thing I want to bring out is that I would like to see more zoning. Most of the times when we have zoning is mainly inland, not at the coast. And people feel like we all like the coast and we want to build near the coast, on the water if possible. But when we do that, we cause further impact. Besides climate change, right? We have that anthropogenic activity taking place. So I would like to see more zoning involve planning. I know it is, how should I say, you need some political will to tell people you cannot build here. I've had to do it for the IME over a couple of years. And you will find that, why? I mean, this is my land, I should be able to use it. So that's one of the things. I know it's hard, but you see it will reduce the need for probably a lot of the structures which are rigid, fixed, and not flexible. So while climate change will be going on and changing, we have these fixed structures which has been impacting our communities. The other thing I like to see is the community involved. I know during the EIA process, the communities are involved. However, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, yes, we build structures, but how effective have they been? Have we been able to assess the effectiveness of these structures? What impact have they caused? Because remember, we build them, we leave them, and we go. But the communities are there, and sometimes they have challenges because what we build wouldn't be able to withstand storms and hurricanes or even general waves and currents. So I've seen over the years where the structures are left, they start to deteriorate, so they're not being effective. One of the things I want to see in the databases that we have, Dr. Gobin, Professor Gobin, is that we include the social aspects of things. How effective are these structures? Are they causing any impacts? Because we will be able to learn from this, as we said, learning from our failures, and that's one of the things. And the only way you can do that, we have to document it and have it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charmaine. And you've raised some really very, very interesting point, which is really the meat of this conversation. How to have more effective buy-in from all stakeholders. And we've mentioned the P word, the political will. And that's really key to our conversation because we have really, we're surrounded by experts in Trinidad and Tobago. We are hearing from some of them and we haven't finished, we're going to hear more. But we really need to collaborate and to get everyone to really appreciate what it means, as Charmaine has mentioned. We need to speak to communities to explain, and is it that we haven't done a very good job in terms of that communication to the communities themselves as stakeholders? Do we need to communicate more effectively to our decision makers so that they too have a better understanding? So hopefully that's going to be one of our positive outcomes after today. So we're going to move to Dr. Deborah Villarroel-Lamb, another colleague. Not the next colleague.
Thank you very much, Prof. Gobin. Deborah from the University of the West Indies. Just a little bit of a brief background. I'm a civil engineer by training. But my specialty is in coastal engineering. So that's where most of the research would lie. At the University of the West Indies, we are, of course, engaged in one of the most important aspects, and that's training our Caribbean region. We have a number of undergraduate and postgraduate programs. We do special courses, etc. And we try to align to the needs of the region. So we do engage stakeholders. We do review our programs over the various years to ensure that we are always meeting the needs of the region. So that's one of our most critical functions. It's not unlike the other universities globally, but we also have another critical role, and that's in advancing the science. We typically do that through research funding, and because we don't have unlimited resources, I have the need, and many of my colleagues have the need to engage with different stakeholders from time to time so that we align with the work that is going on the ground. We ensure that the work that we're doing in terms of research is practical and applicable, and that we can meet the needs of our region well. So just briefly, couple of things that we've been doing. We have a couple of research projects ongoing and part of the department, and we work alongside teams from across the region. That's a uniqueness of the University of West Indies. We can traverse the entire Caribbean region. One of them is NBS in Growth, which is a nature-based project. So as an engineer, I'm involved in the design. We use traditional design techniques, but of course we recognize that there was a limitation with what we're doing. As my colleague mentioned, the hard infrastructure does have an impact and some adverse impacts in the environment. So one of the things we started to look at was how can we integrate the ecological components a little bit better. Knowing information anecdotally doesn't help an engineer because we have to quantify it. So we have to know what level of protection is being offered by the mangroves, by the coral reefs, so that we can integrate that into our design. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. As part of that project, we have implemented a camera system that's at Pigeon Point. It's not our first. We had a sort of a testing or beta version maybe about a decade ago in Mayaro, and we've grown and improved on that over time, finally with the one that we've just commissioned in Pigeon Point, where we can collect video data continuously and look at changes on the shoreline, aligning with what we're seeing in the coastal environment. We're collecting some wave data, etc. One of the things I just want to pick up from my colleague is she mentioned, Charmaine mentioned that we don't always know the causes of coastal erosion. And that's because we are limited in the data sets that we have. In order to identify fully what the causes are, what we need to do is be able to collect the data in a comprehensive manner to pick up those trends and patterns and correlations, and then eliminate what we don't need so we know what are the drivers of the change. And that requires collaboration, which we tend to do most of the time. So that's the NBS in Growth project. I wouldn't talk too much about that. Another one that we are engaged in is our AI for Coast. That's using machine learning techniques with the data that we've collected to identify the trends, that same trends and patterns, building the relationships, identifying which are the most critical parameters in the coastal zone, what's driving the change. So that's one other project we're involved in, and recognizing the need for engagement with our stakeholders. We have had that theme throughout all the projects we've engaged in. The other one, the last one I'll talk about, is our Climate Scan project, where we are collaborating with University in Ireland, as well as our colleagues across the Mona campus. And that's an exciting project. It's a living lab where the stakeholders actually drive the solution. So there's that stakeholder, which is very key to the living lab component, and then we also have the digital twinning that's taking place in terms of the modeling. That particular site is a very interesting site. It's in Falmouth, the bioluminescence lagoon, and there's a lot of critical aspects that's going on there, a lot of conflicts with the various communities. So it's a really nice research project where we can take that information and translate it into a more widely applicable solution across the region. And that's how we tend to work, and that's what we strive to do. So I'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for those really interesting synopses of those projects, which again, it's great for us sitting in this room and our audience online to hear about some of these really exciting projects and the work that's going on in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. So we've just heard from what I'm considering the research group, the colleagues doing research in respect of climate change, impacts, coastal erosion, and the impacts on the oceans, of course. So I'm just going to throw out a question so that's the four of you guys as well as you, Naz. We have just heard about the need for data. It's very key for us to be able to provide solutions, to engage with our policy and decision makers, to have real data. How will we go about this in terms, because we've heard that we need to build capacity as well, and of course funding. So I'm going to ask each of you to have a think about how can we do this? Is it the private sector? We know that our governments are strapped for cash in the region, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the region. Are there benefactors we should be going out after? How can you see us approaching some of the need for the funding to both build capacity and to actually carry out the data gathering? Deborah, then maybe Charmaine and Eva.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Gobin. So one of the ways, of course, is recognizing, and I see that theme throughout the conversation, that collaboration. So that's what we do. One of the first things we step into is when we're looking at the project at Pigeon Point, that's the NBS Engross project. One of the first things I had to do was engage the local people there, talk to the THA. What data sets are you all collecting already? How can we complement it? And that was what was important. So what we do is align to what is ongoing so we can then generate that comprehensive data set. I can only see us overcoming that problem through collaboration. We are not ever going to have unlimited resources and unlimited personnel. That's not going to happen, and that's the reality. We have to find a way to work better together to achieve what we need to achieve, because it's important for us as a country, as a region, to meet the challenges that we face, to overcome the hurdles and not rely too much on everyone outside. But of course, I do understand the need to get those funds, because a lot of the projects that I just mentioned, those funding sources were external to the region, Ireland and the US, and that is fine, but we do need to, when we do get those funding streams, work better to achieve what we need to achieve.
Great, thanks. Charmaine, I know Deborah's covered a lot of it.
Yeah, I would just like to include, maybe that's where the planning comes in, the long-term planning, not short-term planning. So if you have long-term plans, I know sometimes that could be a bit much. And we kind of, again, come together, call it what's important, because everybody's project is probably important. But there's sometimes an overlap. And what I've found sometimes is some data X collect, Y cannot use. So that is why you need that kind of holistic approach to what are the main aspects that we need to collect data and focus on that. Other than that, we would never, as Dr. Lamb said, be able to go out and collect all the data that we need.
Data is something that has been a part of my life for a long time. My background is oceanography. I also have a lot of experience in geographic information systems. And what I found over the years of being involved in these areas is that the public-private sector types of partnerships is what works really, really well when it comes to data collection and making sure that that is maintained, and then making sure that there's downstream use of the information, because it's easy to generate the data, but then who is using it downstream is very, very important, how it's taken up, you know. So another important aspect is the accessibility of the data. So we can always and this is part of being creative with how we view data, how we use it. We can always start off with what we call pilot or proxy information that may be a bit cheaper to gather, may not be as accurate as we want as yet, but at least if we can identify who will use this data, where it becomes important, then you start to see more funding come in eventually to feed into gathering the more accurate information over time. So at least let's start somewhere. That's what I always encourage people to do when it comes to data gathering, and trying to maintain your data set. It's good to at least start, and hopefully that will pull the investors into it to ensure that you have a sustainable data collection strategy.
Kerry, did you want to add anything? Kerry, did you? In terms of how you see us getting more data, funding, and the appropriateness of it?
Well, I would like to touch on the zoning that my colleague mentioned before. Is very critical, and I'd like to indicate that the ICCM committee is mandated as part of their mandate to have a zoning system where we have a coastal setback. That is part of the plan that was established, and it was approved by cabinet, and we have most of us here as stakeholders, so we will be gelling together to make sure that we have proper zoning, proper coastal setback, proper design systems for the building on the coastline.
Great. Great.
Thank you so much for that. Naz, did you want to add anything to? Oh, after sure.
Please.
Sure. So I think that last aspect that both Charmaine and Mr. Sheppard spoke about is crucial, and I think IMA is pursuing this right now with marine spatial planning. I think that is very important, especially for an area like the Gulf of Paria where it is confined with a lot of activity. I think that is crucial because we might have ideas about seeing a space where we think, it might be good to put a plant or a port and then conduct the dredging. I think Charmaine and I are well aware of the issues that can come about with that. So I think marine spatial planning is very important. And I just wanted to touch on the point of data. And I think when we looked at the CNCMP, we had a lot of opportunities to drill very deep down into data. And one of them, the Comprehensive National Coastal Monitoring Program. And I think what that really identified, and we were in a good position to target this specifically because one of the requirements of the CNCMP was having a look at data that's locked behind confidentiality clauses. And the EMA has a massive storage of data that is compiled by various, in most cases it will be the oil and gas industry will be collecting data. They have the funds to be able to do that. So for example, we had a gauge off the East Coast for maybe an 8-month period that was deployed, but that information is so beneficial to everyone. Even if you're setting up models, in the case of the university, those things are very important. But in the past, I think that the university has been good at looking at the monitoring programs that were going on, some of them being done by us, and having access to that data for their training programs. But I think definitely there is a need to look at that data gathering and for it to be done very strategically, where we are not overspending on the data that we're collecting, but we are maximizing the resources that we have available at this time.
Excellent. Thank you so very much for that, those comments, everyone. And we do have one question from online, and I think it might be most appropriate for you, Eva. How are tourism stakeholders involved in this conversation? And of course, that'll do with your marine spatial planning project.
For tourism, it is an important sector for blue economy development. We do make it a priority to ensure that they're included in not just the implementation, but also the planning, the development of the marine spatial plan. So there is a socioeconomic an analysis that has to take place with that plan. And we want to ensure that sectors like tourism, fisheries as well, other sectors that we know are important contributors and users of our shorelines. With tourism, we know that there's a lot of development, infrastructure that comes with that kind of sector in terms of, building out hotels, recreation, to serve our tourism industry. And we want to make sure that any planning, any research, any data that informs the policies for guiding development of our tourism sector is meaningful, and we want to make sure that it's guided by principles that allow us to sustainably maintain our environment, our coral reef, or seagrass, or mangrove areas. So with sustainable effort going into, developing these areas, the hope is that tourism will catch up, because nowadays, when it comes to CSR, ESG types of interventions with private companies, it's very, very important that we look at how we can bridge the two. So it's not just enough to say, oh, no development should happen. And yeah, it's trying to see how we can do it in a very sustainable way.
Thank you very much. That is clearly the best approach. Important to have all stakeholders at the table. So we've reached a nice point now where we've heard a lot about research and the projects that are being done. And we're going to hear now from colleagues who are working on the application of these solutions. And with that, we're going to start with Ainka.
So thanks very much, Professor Gobin, and also thanks to the UN and the Embassy of France. It's great to be here. My name is Ainka Granderson, and I'm the Resilience Program Manager at the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, CANARI for short. And I think maybe to round out the panel, I want to share a civil society perspective of some of the key coastal adaptation and resilience challenges that are being faced in TNT, and thinking about the way forward for this blue future. And that's going to be based on work that I've been doing at CANARI, which is a regional independent nonprofit that has been working for over 35 years on stakeholder participation, stewardship of natural resources for more equitable, resilient, and sustainable development. So we actually have a number of coastal resilience initiatives that fall under the resilience program that I lead, which is really about resilient communities, resilient livelihoods, and resilient ecosystems in the face of climate change and disasters. And I think they offer some really interesting insights. I'm going to hone in on one particular one called Tech for Coastal Resilience, which we're actually now wrapping up this month. And it really aimed at understanding local climate impacts and vulnerabilities that are facing our coastal communities, understanding the priorities for action, and also looking at how we can improve the ability of our coastal management agencies, many of who are sitting here, and local resource users to actually collaborate to map, monitor, and manage coastal changes using digital technologies. So in our case, we looked at drones and GIS, but that actually links really well with the 3D modeling, the digital twins, and can link with the AI-based platforms that have been mentioned by Nazeer, by Dr. Lamb, and others, Dr. Maxam. So I'm not actually going to focus so much on the technology aspect because other people have talked about it, but more about what has come out from the vulnerability assessments and action planning that we did with these at-risk communities. So we worked with 10 of them 6 in Trinidad and Tobago, like Icacus in the southwest, where you mentioned there's very heavy erosion, also Mayaro, Matlot, and then in Tobago we worked with 4 communities, including Castara, Speyside, Roxborough, etc. So we really engaged with fisherfolk, with dive and tour operators, with the local disaster committees, village councils, as well as other community-based groups and NGOs. And we also engaged with the coastal agencies, many of who are here, as well as those in the TAJ and Tobago and the fisheries authorities. And so I think working with those communities, what was highlighted were things like significant coastal erosion, which may not all be climate change related, and some serious concerns about sea level rise and having to relocate potentially looking into the future. Also, inland flooding is a big concern in some of these coastal communities, especially when there's heavy rainfall. Heat and water stress was something that people highlighted during hot, dry spells. And there's also coral bleaching, which was highlighted by the fisherfolk, for example, and other changes in marine life that's happening with rising ocean temperatures and other changes that they can actually identify, where they're seeing changes in currents, changes in upwelling, and all kinds of things that are happening. It was very interesting actually having those conversations. And then obviously, last but not least, sargassum influxes clogging the beaches and what that's doing. And so they highlighted a number of different impacts on their livelihoods, particularly on fisheries and tourism, but also on health, also on their property, their infrastructure. And I think also it was really interesting to hear about some of the compounding challenges, because they also linked a lot of the things that were happening to the fact that there's also rapid coastal development, pollution, there's unsustainable use as well. And there's also economic fallout that they're facing from the pandemic, but also all these soaring food prices that we have now with the wars, etc. So there's a lot of different and very interesting conversations that we had. And people were not only interested in venting their problems, it was also really interesting that they wanted to speak about what are the actions, what can we do? And so we actually worked with the communities and with the coastal agencies to develop community resilience plans. And I think what was interesting is that there was a range of things that they highlighted and prioritized as part of that process, and that we should be thinking about when we go to conferences and other places to mobilize resources, et cetera, to support coastal resilience. So it ranged from early warning systems for extreme weather, which is a significant issue, to nature-based solutions. They specifically identify things like restoring their mangroves, their coral reefs as key coastal ecosystems. They also identify things like cleaning up water courses and the beaches from sargassum, even using local volunteers and those types of things. And then obviously more infrastructural kinds of things like upgrading their breakwaters, seawalls, upgrading drainage infrastructure, and then diversifying livelihoods, and including things like how do we collect and use sargassum to create commercial value-added products. So the conversations I've been having with communities, I think, are very interesting. And I think things to pick up on as we move forward. And I would actually expand on the point that Dr. Maxam just said and say that public-private civil society partnerships are important as we move forward. And to maybe just build on that point by saying that one of the, I think, most interesting takeaways from this work that we've been doing is a collaborative, multi-stakeholder governance model is key, where the coastal management agencies are not just working with each other, but they're working with local residents and resource users to really come together to jointly plan and implement actions to protect our coast, protect livelihoods, and ensure that we have that resilient blue future that we want to see. So I'll stop there. I'll just note that The assessment reports, the community resilience plans are actually coming out next week, and they will be on our website if people are interested in accessing them. And I think with that, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you so much, Ainka. It was really quite interesting to hear you say resilience, livelihoods, and resilience in respect of, we are accustomed with ecosystems and people, coasts and resources. But it's really important that we recognize that the communities that, are coastal and their livelihoods need to be protected. So thank you so much for really enlightening us this afternoon. And we're going to go next with you, Maryam.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I want to first start by saying congratulations to the UN, of which I'm part of, and the French Embassy for organizing this. I think it's a great opportunity to be here, to be able to listen to all the research that's been done, and also to be able to participate. So thank you very much. But I'm also pleased just to share with you our commitment as UNICEF. My name is Maryam Abdu. I'm the Chief of Social Policy and Social Protection at the Eastern Caribbean Area Office, which is made up of 12 countries within the Eastern Caribbean countries that are Anglophone. So we work with Anglophone countries that are under the Eastern Caribbean. But also to highlight that Trinidad and Tobago is very important for UNICEF because it has over 55% of children within the 12 countries that we work in. So it's very, very important for us. But what do we do in UNICEF? And I'm just going to be very brief about it. We work, as many of you have mentioned, about collaboration, partnership. We all work with partnership with government, private sector, civil society organization, and other bodies and development partners to ensure that every child everywhere has access to rights, protection, and services that they deserve, whether it's an emergency, whether it's in development context, or whether there's a disaster. The main thing that we want to focus on is improving equitable access to quality education and strengthening mental health for children. Because most times we forget that part, the mental health of the humans that feel all this climate change impact. Whatever we're doing, children are the center of what we do. So mainly what I'm going to be highlighting in what we feel climate means for children, I'm going to be highlighting on some data. Many of you have mentioned data. It is very important for UNICEF because that's how we make decisions, that's how we influence policies, investment for children. But also, I'm going to highlight some challenges and also look at some of the things we are doing in UNICEF. And if time permits, I'll give you a short story of true life story of a person's life, a child's life that has been changed as a result of that. So just to start, to define what the challenges are for children, I want to look at a statistic which we conducted in 2022, which is called the Children's Climate Risk Index, which is an index that captures exposure to shocks and stress and child vulnerabilities. We do recognize that sometimes people that are closer to the coast have more challenges and likely to be poorer than those that are far away, because when there are flooding or any hurricane, they are first to be impacted than others. So there's that overlap. And what would the data help us to do is to plan better, so that when there is a first line of action, we know what to do. I'll just give a few statistics, but more for Latin America, and we'll protest the fact that when we talk about no data, which I'll talk about later, you'll know why. This is covering the whole Latin America and Caribbean. You have 55 million children that are exposed to water scarcity. Water is important for children. They say there's a lot of water, not enough water for children to take or use. You have 60 million children who are exposed to hurricane on a yearly basis. 85 million are exposed to Zika, which are all climate-related issues. But what am I trying to say? You have more children, and children are more vulnerable to these shocks by virtue of the fact that the younger they are, if they're younger, because of their small mass, they're likely to be more impacted than an adult. And we all know, and I always say, children are not 0.7% of an adult. Children, sometimes, for those of you who have children, know that you spend more resources in taking care of a child than even an adult. So what are the challenges that young people are facing when it comes to climate engagement and disaster response? For climate and disaster risk policies and programs, they lack the engagement of children. We always assume for children when we make those decisions. And like Joanna mentioned, children technically are our future for tomorrow. What we put in children today is what we expect tomorrow. So what are we doing in terms of engaging them to understand the next level for the next generation when we get old? Will we be willing to go with not engaging them for the future? Because it's our future as well, but maybe not the future that will be able to make changes like they will be. Children and young people are not given enough opportunity to engage in climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. They don't know. We talk a lot about our research, but how are they engaged to understand what it means? How are they engaged to know that if we, just by switching off lights when you don't need it, has an impact? How are we engaging them to know that by planting trees, schools, and all those things can actually make impact in the carbon emission and carbon footprint? So how are we making sure that they understand that? And we also realize that social services are not resilient to the impact of disasters, climate change and environment. So most times when there is a disaster, we move children out of schools and then we put we are not prepared for it. Water systems don't put high-level taps so that when there is a flooding, children can still get, or adults can get water. We are not resilient to that. We have limited data, and I think everyone has mentioned it, and it's very important. Now, what is UNICEF doing? And I'm going to give just 3 points and among the many things that we're doing. We're focusing on ensuring that whatever is being done in terms of climate policy and NDCs, nationally determined contributions, which is linked to climate change actions, we're making sure that the needs of children is integrated. And how are we doing it? We're ensuring that they're engaged in the discussions. Example, like in St. Lucia, Grenada, and St. Kitts and Nevis, young people are engaged to know what they really want to be part of the climate action. And as we've been told, the NDCs are supposed to be bold and ambitious. How do we bring the needs of the children? We've shown examples in these places. Climate risk, Children's Climate Risk Index, like I mentioned, is one of the ways that we're trying to find out, okay, what are the overlaps between climate and children's vulnerability? How can we help children during crisis to be able to survive and be able to thrive? And then we have one very important component, which is on youth engagement platforms. UNICEF has supported so many youth engagement platforms. And this is more focused on ensuring that young people find support during crisis. Because most times when there's a climate challenge, you're trying to run around to get the properties, and you forget about the mental health and the challenges that it poses to children. So we've had a few platforms that I'll mention here: Youth Engagement Strategy and Climate Action Platform. We also have the recent Green Rising Initiative in Barbados, where it's focused on agro-tech for young people, strengthening their capacity and giving them the skills for the 21st century to be able to assess those the changes that we have now, and they can compete favorably globally and within the Caribbean. UNICEF is putting $1 million into that, but also creating awareness, ensuring that they understand what climate change means in terms of supporting that. And some of the other areas are U-Report, which I think it's very helpful for engaging young people into the discussion. Trinidad and Tobago has one of the best practice. It has about 15,000 young people that are engaged in U-Report. And this is an engagement where you can send out messages and get their inputs on either strategy, policy, or even the research you are doing. You can get the voice of children in your research. And lastly, we are building skills for young people, and we have the Young Caribbean Minds, where you have young people that are engaged from 21 countries, and they're able to support each other, and they have online counselors that they can reach out to when there is a challenge. Brings me to my story, just a short story, and then I'll give her the microphone. I just wanted to share with you one of the very important stories that we always like to share, and we have the permission of the person to share it, a young person. His name is Daniel, and it's a story of moving from crisis to purpose. Daniel, in 2018, when there was a flash flooding in Trinidad and Tobago, his home was devastated. Everything, he lost everything. His home, he couldn't go to school, his belongings, and he lost he had a sense of instability. He had instability, so he struggled emotionally, but there was no support. So he started drinking. He started engaging in negative coping strategy. In fact, he started thinking of on the unthinkable, whether to end it all, because for him there was no purpose. He couldn't go to school, and he doesn't have anything. But then everything changed for Daniel. UNICEF Mental Health Focal Point Network, when he joined it, he heard about it in the papers, and then he joined. And when he joined a group of 21 young Caribbean minds. And what do? They found purpose. And he found purpose and healing. And now Daniel is one voice that is supporting other youths across the 21 Caribbean, developing coping strategies for related trauma and mental health challenges, in developing strategies for young people to be able to speak to each other. We have also, some of the things that they're doing is, I support my friend. In crisis, young people tend to talk to young people. They don't talk to adults. So they have that platform that they are able to reach out to counselors. They are also able to reach out to colleagues in school, whether it's in violence or in disaster, what challenges they are facing. Daniel's journey is one of resilience, but not all stories end this way. His experience highlights the urgent needs for more substantial youth-driven mental health and climate resilience support across the region. We want more Daniels. We want more other females and everyone, especially the young people, to benefit from this. And what it means is that government needs to make sure that we invest in disaggregated data, timely data and quality data that can give us information to be able to make quick decisions. We have to prioritize child-sensitive investment, things that will make sure children feel they have hope that when things happen, I have a safeguard. Lastly, we have to strengthen intersectoral, multi-stakeholder coordination. No one can do it alone, whether it's in financing, investment, whichever way. Children needs to be put in the center of it all. If we want to ensure that our future is bright, we need to brighten children's life today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maryam, and I'm sure we all agree we would have loved to hear even more stories. Maybe we will have time. It's really, I don't want to say it's the end of the conversation, but it was a nice highlight, an appropriate highlight, because you're perfectly correct. We and some of us in tertiary institutions and so on, often we are talking to colleagues and ourselves, and we perhaps forget that we need to also engage that very future that we're talking about. When we talk about sustainable development, we're talking about development for the future generations' enjoyment, our children, grandchildren, and so on, other generations, which is exactly what you've just talked about. And these young faces are already here. So it is important that we engage them and include them in the conversation. So thank you so much for that very appropriate and very clear message to all of us to remember to include youth and, of course, children. It is their future. We're sitting behind closed desks, we're having conversations with decision makers and all the communities and stakeholders, and perhaps we are forgetting this stakeholder group, which really is very key. So thank you so much for reminding us all here about the importance of youth and children in this conversation, which is really very exciting so far. And we did have one additional question online the question was, how is the energy sector involved? And unfortunately, Mr. Boodoo is not with us. The question would have been appropriate for him, being from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. So we just want to say that we will obviously make a note of the question and respond, as soon as we can get a response from Mr. Boudou and any other colleague who might be appropriate. At this point, then, I'm very pleased to invite colleagues in the audience or participants in the audience. If there's any question, we have an amazing group of experts here. They're all very prepared to respond to your questions. So if you would like, please raise your hand and we will get a microphone to you to respond. The panel was that good, was it? Or no one wants to be the first, yeah. But, absolutely. Yeah, panelists as well, please.
Thank you. I really was tuned into the contribution from my sister from UNICEF. And it was particularly compelling for me because the city of Port of Spain is a first responder for disaster. We have a disaster management unit, and part of the work that they do includes outreach, going to different schools and teaching children in schools about disaster preparedness. And I think it would be a useful conversation to take back to my colleagues on the City Council about how do we support our people holistically. So when there's a disaster, we often think about we need to provide cots, we need to provide food items, we need to provide water, etc. But how do we provide support for those who are the most vulnerable? And in this case, the conversation was about our children, and also I would include in our conversation at City Hall, how do we support our single mothers who may be in a state where they're particularly vulnerable to a disaster event. So thank you for your contribution.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or any panelists wants to ask a colleague around the table any question on what you might have heard? And while you're thinking about that, because I expect to see some raised hands, I'm going to ask my colleague, Eva, in the conversation on marines, and it's because I'm a marine biologist, of course, in your project with the Marines development of a marine spatial plan, is there a proposal or is there consideration that we then have something like almost a moratorium on any further development or construction while this project is going on? Sorry to put you on a spot, but it's just...
So I'm not sure having a moratorium really serves the purpose of implementing a marine spatial plan. I can imagine that the plan is supposed to address how all sectors are incorporated into conservation and sustainable development.
So I guess I was asking from the point of view that while you're developing a plan, what happens then if you don't have, what happens if you have someone doing something that's outside of your plan or proposing a development that's perhaps outside of the plan? That's really why
it would have to be the established regulations and protocols and policies that would have to be in place. Regulation and laws play an important part in whether we enforce how it is that we determine that this is a breach or some kind of infringement, and that's what we rely on in the meantime. So our colleagues at the EMA, I'm sure, could speak even more to the regulations and licenses that guide a lot of our development. And yes, we are playing catch up in the meantime, which is why a marine spatial plan is so crucial, in its development at this time.
Thank you. Any hands yet? Am I seeing any? Oh, excellent.
Okay, I could ask a question. Oh, sit down. Okay. I could ask a question and break the ice. Hopefully, other people ask questions afterwards. Yes. But my name is Khadija Siot. I have a youth organization, EcoSeas Caribbean. I see Dr. Judith, and I know that some of our members were your MSc students and everything, yes. But my question directly is to UNICEF. And how exactly can we increase youth engagement and youth participation in policy spaces like these? So I went to the session this morning, at this one now, the panel, not much youth present and everything else. And you talked about providing the opportunity, capacity building, etc. And I think it's so important to have youth present as stakeholders and share their voices and everything else. So how can we improve this as well as, how can we improve this in general? And not just have them be like, check, young person present, etc.
Thank you very much. That was spot on. Yes. I totally agree with you. There are no youths here. And we're talking about the future. So how can we engage young people? How have we engaged young people as UNICEF? What we have done is consciously ensure that in platforms, in schools, and recently we're working as a UN, looking at a child-friendly cities initiative, which when his worship mentioned about participation of children, I thought, okay, could be a good opportunity. We're planning to engage one of the municipalities, San Fernando, in ensuring that cities are safe and secure and for children, and they're able to access services and to play. And it includes resilience, climate actions, and many other things. But what's very important in that initiative is that it's participation of children all the way through. So including in planning, in budgeting, in agreeing on the actions that they are supposed to take on their behalf, and even including developing the strategy for child-friendly cities initiative. So we're planning to engage them. But what we do as UNICEF is ensure that in everything that we're going to do, children are involved, they have a voice, and they have an agency. And like I mentioned, as Young Caribbean Minds, when I mentioned, every activity that we do, conference, you will have a youth angle to it. And one way that we can do it as an organization is consciously either use the U report that we have, platform, because it's not every child that will be able to participate, but to make sure that we engender equity and reach out to the hard-to-reach children. Let it not just be the voice of the elites. Let it be the voice of generality of the children, so that when we do plans, it takes into cognizance all the needs of the children everywhere. So we're doing that, and I'm sure, I don't know whether we're partnering with you, but we partner with many other agencies, University of West Indies and many other organizations and CSOs and government especially. So that's one way, and also using the technology that we have to be able to engage children. But thank you very much for raising that.
So just to build on her point, I think also really focusing on how we build capacity, and then how we also provide a voice and a seat at the table, because we have to create space, and we have to create space that's youth-led spaces. So not that I create a space, but I give you space to say, do you want to have a youth working group that helps to address particular issues? You decide what are the priorities, what are the needs, what are the kinds of resources, and then we can collaborate to do that together. So a quick example is CANARI co-chairs the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, which is a grassroots movement that's about civil society and other non-state actors coming together to promote climate justice and local resilience. And we have a youth working group. And I'm not involved in the youth working group at all. It's run by youth. They came up with their agenda for what they want to do. They run their events, and they come to me to ask for guidance and funds. But they get to do what they want. And I think making sure we have spaces like that is really important in order to allow for youth to really have a voice, to show leadership, and to really be actively and meaningfully engaged in these processes.
Thank you so much for those comments, both Maryam and Ainka. And I really like the last point that you made as well, Ainka, in that it actually is part of capacity building, because we talk, we go to meetings and we talk and we want data and we want to build capacity for scientists and researchers and so on. But we also need to have young people engaged at that level to empower them and to take the messages, to absorb the messages, to have a better appreciation. And it's across the board. Perhaps this is what is needed to, again, maybe to respond to one of your comments, Charmaine, about people not understanding, community people not quite appreciating, and landowners, why they shouldn't put a structure out in the forefront of the ocean kind of thing. And if we reach out to youth, and they're always very, very receptive, and children, they're always very engaging and very happy to be part of this. I think it really is a good point for us to consider when we next talk about true capacity building, which we really need to continue doing in Trinidad and Tobago, and certainly as we approach our contributions at a global level, and especially in this conversation with the effects and impacts of climate change. So I'm going to ask, would you like to say anything more, Stephanie? Because you wanted to expand on a couple of comments. Because now we've heard a lot about the research, we've heard a lot about the engagement of society, the need for collaboration, the need for data. Can you advise us on how we might be able to finance some of these needs? Another good ending for the conversation. I put you on the spot.
Well, as a general consideration, I think any multilateral can't avoid this topic. I think climate change is there, and any investment can be sustainable over time if it doesn't take into account a resilient component. So that's why I said at the beginning that our target is 40% of the approvals, and that is a high percentage that will be for sure increasing over time. I explained a little bit on the Southern Push plan and that we have, and it's been executed with UWI. That is a technical cooperation. But we do have also lending currently, and I remember since you mentioned the 2018 flooding, which was a critical moment for the country. At that point, CAF engaged rapid assessment to assess the vulnerability of Trinidad. Based on that, we worked in what we call a PPSA. Well, it's like a pre-investment for the water sector. That was almost $500,000 US dollars in a grant to draft a plan for flooding and drainage across the island of Trinidad. So that plan is $800 million US dollars. It's a lot. Currently, we are financing $40 million US dollars that are basically the most critical or the most urgent measures across 5 basins in the island of Trinidad, and it will also cover Major Port Spain in the second phase. So. Basically, I think that the financing is there because we know that the need is big, and that we are very open to mobilize even more resources to tackle this issue, especially in the Caribbean.
Sure.
One of the mandates of the Coastal Protection Unit is to use more green engineering, soft engineering. And we have learned the hard way that you can't just go out and plant more mangrove, especially when that area consisted of mangrove before. You have to recreate the conditions for the mangrove to thrive. So I'll throw to some of my colleagues, what are some good green engineering practices? How do you get slope stability with sea grapes or recreating the mangrove system.
Question.
Yes, a question. I can't give like a definitive answer in terms of we can do X, Y, and Z. One of the things we want to do is develop the best practice. One of the things that I saw, I had worked in the UK many years ago, and I saw that they had the list of vegetation that exists naturally in different environments. And they had the different features in terms of roots and leaves and stems. And from there, they had parameters that we can use to quantify stability. And in order to get to that stage, we need to be able to go out, map the vegetation in a given area, quantify how the root system are going to stabilize the slopes, quantify if they exist on the shoreline, how it's going to affect the waves running up. So to tell you a definitive answer, it's not easy, but I can tell you this is something we're trying to do. And that's why we come to harass you all the time, sorry, because we want to make sure we meet in that need. We recognize it's important. We don't want to just destroy the vegetation on the coastline because they have value and they have engineering value. And that's what we want to capture.
The only other, I would say, solution can be, and we have never tried it, but I think it's sand dunes. People don't know that we have sand dunes around the coast. We go to Maracas, Las Cuevas, there are sand dunes. That's why Maracas was protected in 2005 when there was quote-unquote tsunami. Right. Yes, tsunami. It wasn't a tsunami. But yeah, that's one of the ways the beaches protect itself. So sand dunes. Mayaro, there are lots of sand dunes. And Mayaro is a high energy environment. So one of the things is maybe, I don't know, Nazeer or Dr. Lamb could look at using that technology now, sand dunes, because they're relatively inexpensive, right? And I've seen them all the way in Long Island. They use them, they protect them. You can't walk on them, so they do work, do function. They may not function everywhere, but we can look at that also.
Just to quickly add on to Charmaine's point, I had a former PhD student, he was in Guadeloupe, and that was one of the focus of his research. They looked at doing the sand dunes, using the beach fences, etc., to stabilize the sand dunes, and then using that as a form of protection, because there are many coastlines that use dune systems only to protect the coastlines and to offer the level of protection that is required. But we need to find out what that is for our coast and design it adequately.
We have a question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I have a question about one of the key elements or players in the blue economy, which is the maritime industry. The maritime industry, as you know, almost 98%, I will say, trade of the Trinidad and Tobago comes from the maritime industry. And the maritime industry has always been an industry that has been touted for economic diversification through various activities within the industry. Have you been able to incorporate the industry into the conversation? That's one question. And the other question is there a methodology of prioritizing activities in the marine space?
I think that's is on the hotspot.
Yes, so it is important for us to incorporate the maritime industry, definitely in our blue economy strategy. We're at the beginning stage of developing, for example, our carbon credit system, but the hope is that when we do find a suitable instrument for carbon trading, that we consider the maritime industry as helping to develop something like that, or be part of our carbon trading system. So there are different instruments that can be used. We'll have to see which one works best for an industry, like our maritime industry, as well as other sectors across the board. It can't be that we're only focusing on just a few sectors, which we think are traditionally the ones that are involved in our blue sectors, but we have to look at different sectors and businesses across the board.
Yeah, I had a question for for His Worship. When you gave your contribution, you mentioned the sort of like the line between central government and local government, and and the boundaries that you have to work within. And I think a lot of the things that were discussed here are dealt with at local government level, right? Like disaster risk reduction, every constituency has their own disaster risk, and only when it's like beyond their capacity to deal with themselves, they have to go to the ODPM or whatever. In an ideal world, or what would you see as the necessary reforms of local government to give local government bodies like yourselves the capacity to deal with these problems?
Thank you so much for the question. I think the most critical reform would be to give the council some more executive authority. Presently, I, as the mayor, do not have the authority on a day-to-day basis to give. I'm not a CEO. I'm a mayor, so that the council, all together, all 16 of us, have executive authority, which means in order for me to make a decision, I have to get 16 people in a room or on a phone call. For us to take a formal decision, it has to be minuted, and then a minute paper has to go from administration to a department. And then I have to work on following up on the implementation of the decision. I think empowering the elected representative to have some more executive authority at the local level would be really critical for us to be able to move more quickly, for us to be more responsive. And the reality is that your local government representative almost always is your neighbor, and is affected by the performance of the municipality on a day-to-day basis, so has a real interest in seeing things develop. For example, we're speaking about climate resilience and coastal communities being particularly vulnerable. My colleague, who is the councillor for Sealots, she lives in Sealots. My councillor, who's my colleague, who's the councillor for John John area, lives in John John. So that we have a really vested interest in the outcome. Because if we don't do the work, when the disaster comes, it is our home that is affected. So I think the developing some more executive authority is critical for us to be able to make more happen faster.
Thank you so very much, and on my behalf, thank you all. You've been an amazing panelist team. Thank you very much for your presentations, your thoughts, your considerations, and to our engaging audience as well. And I'm going to ask our hostess to give the last remarks.
Well, thanks very much, Professor Gobin. And after 2 hours, we could go on, if not for the fact that we have other responsibilities, and many of us are hungry, which we are going to address later on. But thank you so much. This was a very rich exchange, and I think that together also with our online participants, I will convey a sense of it's an unfinished conversation, and I think that it was a privilege to have these 2 hours to focus on so many issues of climate impact, coastal erosion, adaptation, all of the initiatives which are happening, and good examples that were brought to the attention today in terms of adaptation. But I think it's an unfinished conversation, and I think that we as the United Nations are going to do everything that we can to continue in the same spirit of transparency, also online, in the same spirit of inclusion, in the spirit of attracting more stakeholders to the table. What we heard around today at this specific session was that the funding is available. And this is very good. It's one of the key takeaways. It's one of those occasions on which I am walking away from the meeting in which there is positive message, and it's real. And I think that, of course, funding is available for projects which are bankable, projects which are implementable, projects which are supported by the higher level authority, and projects which have also a buy-in from the local stakeholders. And arriving at the point of such projects is a very complex process. It requires not only research and data and all of the inputs that experts can provide, but it also requires planning at the national level, planning at the local level, all of the ingredients that we discussed today. So it is a space, or it is a process that requires collaboration. It requires cross-sectoral conversations, because it's not only about financing, it's about governance, it's about regulations and institutions, capacity to plan and execute, and then monitor and evaluate what you've planned based on the evidence or using the data that you need to have. And so you need to be able to gather the data. Many colleagues have mentioned also the fact that there is data, but not necessarily integrated and not necessarily used in a coordinated fashion. What I heard today was also a very, very important point about community engagement. Communities are dealing with it already. We need to make them visible. We need to make them feel that they're doing something really very, very important, historically important. Adaptation and mitigation is in the hands of people who are facing the impact of climate change on a daily basis, and they are the heroes, if we like to say, on the front lines, but they're already doing this. And our job in the United Nations is to bring those examples to the public eye and to the public space, and talk more with those who are dealing at the community level with those solutions. I think that also we have mentioned different kinds of impacts of climate. We talked about the need to also think about mental health impacts, how stressful it is, and what is the coping, I would say, capacity of the young people. And I think that one of the next conversations in the future is going to be focusing exactly on the needs of young people and what kind of stresses they're under in terms of climate, in terms of other issues that they are facing on a daily basis. This is something central to the mandate of the United Nations, to look after the young people, but also to listen to them and to understand the world as they see it, not necessarily as we see it. So this was, in a nutshell, not a full summary of this session, because obviously we, have substantive presentations which we are going to ask you to send to us, and we are going to prepare a proper report. But just in conclusion, I wanted to say that we, as the United Nations, are very, very happy and proud to have gathered this eminent panel of experts as one of the 3 sessions that took place today. In the morning, we had an expert session on pollution. We had also a parallel session on blue economy and the economic aspects of oceans. And here we talked about climate and adaptation and coastal erosion. The full report from these 3 sessions is going to be presented tomorrow at 5 o'clock at the residence of the Ambassador of France. We invite you to be there for the closing ceremony, in which in half an hour we are going to capture your key messages, which are then going to go further to the conference in Nice. Are we saying Nice? Yes. This is about the Nice conference in France. But again, my pleasure to be here as the host, but I speak both on behalf of the UN and the Embassy of France to express our great appreciation for you to join us, to share your knowledge, and to share also your ideas on how to move forward. I want to say this was a privilege and also a very, very big learning opportunity. And I think that we as the UN are trying to do things a little bit differently, and I hope that online participants, I see that we still have 20 after 2 hours, so it worked very well. Thank you very much to all of the online participants. We appreciate it very much, and we are going to continue in this kind of format. So on this note, again, thanks a lot. Also, thank you very much to our technical team and all of the colleagues who organized it. Today, we are being assisted by our UN Information Center. You know these colleagues from next door. And they have done a wonderful job doing the online production of this event this morning and today, and this afternoon. So again, thanks a lot. And now the last point is to invite you to snacks outside and networking and exchanging your contacts and continuing the conversation as we all are working towards sustainable oceans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before you get, because I saw that the five is something so